speak on this topic, planning versus political economy. So hopefully it won't be too jarred of a title. Okay, so just going to read a quote here from, it's kind of a quote I've taken from Cocktail Trials Towards New Socialism. I think is kind of representative of a lot of, probably the majority of people's kind of thoughts about what socialism is really all about. It's a planned system where the division of necessary and surplus product is the result of deliberate social decision. Okay, so the point often put forward is the fact that capitalism is anarchic and socialism will be planned, and planned is what defines socialism, right? That's what defines the socialism. Okay. So this is really an example of a fallacy of the converse. Okay, like socialism will be a planned economy, okay, but a planned economy does not equal socialism. Okay, now like for Cocktail, that he's using it to justify why the Soviet Union was socialist, right? It just happened not to be democratic, or just happened to have wage labour, and it happened to have exploitation, it happened to have classes, and it happened to have all that. But trust me, it was socialist, lads, because we did some planning in advance. Okay.
Can you speak closer to the microphone, please?
Yes. Thanks. So if we go back to what Marx and Engels were talking about planning, right? Go back to the Beards, and when they were talking about planning, they were talking about it really in terms of the anarchy of the market. Okay, so we're talking about it in two senses. Okay, so the two senses were kind of what I call, I think it's fair to say, like productive and strategic. So in capitalism, you have like private property, and you have individual firms reproducing themselves individually. Okay, and so Firm A and Firm B both don't know what Firm A or Firm B is doing. They both invest in a new machine to outcompete this guy, and then they both go to the market with the new machine as overproduction, and they've both wasted their money on their new machines. Okay? This is the sense Marx talks about how planning was planned, but on the individual property level, right? And so this was like, in terms of a waste of labour, like the amount of dead labour in those machines, unnecessary, and it was inefficient. Okay, and then the other sense was strategic kind of planning. So in socialism, utopian and scientific, or anti-Turing, whatever title you like, Engels gone to this big long thing where he talks about how in capitalism, in early capitalism in England, the firm would go into like the first town that had a nice river that they could put a mill in, and they could get the water power, and they would destroy it, they'd build it up, and then they just move on to the next town, and there was this like anarchic, very destructive development, right? And so there's those two aspects. So this kind of more like a strategic planning, like in a socialist society, we wouldn't do it in this ad hoc manner. We would do it in a planned, more efficient, or rational way. And so these were the two aspects in which they were actually critiquing the anarchy of the market. And so underlying all this is this idea of individual reproduction, individual capitalist firm, private property relation, and then and socialism then would be communal reproduction. So it would be society reproducing together, and it would be able to rationally plan. So these are the two senses in which it was. Okay, so central planning doesn't exist in Marx or Engels. Okay, there's 29,000 pages in 50 volumes of the Marx and Engels collected thing. There's not a single mention of central planning. It doesn't exist. There's nothing even close. When they talk about planning, they talk about things like a rational plan, a common plan, a social plan. The one case that you could say is closest to something like a central plan is a single vast plan, they say, but that's specifically exactly after Engels is talking about all those towns getting destroyed. So the sense in which he talks about the single plan is in the sense of we would do things from a more rational point of view, right? Not this idea of central plan and detailed productions, computer telling everything what to do, and a central solver. Right? That does not exist in Marx or Engels. Another one, ex ante versus ex post. Those terms, they don't exist in any of the 29,000 pages of the writings, okay? Nor do the actual concepts. The concepts don't exist, okay? So they don't talk about ex ante and ex post. Okay? If we take ex ante seriously, right? We take it seriously. What does ex ante mean? It means that we plan everything from the start and we don't take feedback, okay? And if you actually have, if you're going to buy into ex ante as a concept, that means that there's no feedback ever. You just plan from right from the beginning and we're all knowing and we'll go forever. If you take ex post stuff into context, it's like that we have this idea of planning in socialism as this 1 year, this 2 year, or this longer term one, where actually what that is that's a veteran mode of production. It's a slow feedback process. You know, socialism, if it's to be a more advanced mode of production, has to remove the fetters of capitalist production. You can't put in new fetters of capitalism, new fetters upon a mode of production. Okay. But let me just say one thing, like, what's the problem? Like, there's no problem with the market. Sorry, the market, there's problems with the market. The problem with like the market is not that it is reactive, right? That it's highly reactive to responses. The problem with the market and market exchange is that within that exchange, within the Ferdia, we exchange a ice cream, I buy an ice cream for Ferdia. The problem is within that exchange is the valorization of surplus labour. And in that is exploitation in the production is being realised and somebody's getting a profit. Right? That's the problem with the market. The problem is not that there are exchanges of goods, you know, transfers of goods between people. It's not the problem. Right? That's Marx's whole point. It's that it's the valorization of surplus labour. Okay. Now, we also have this thing that's in the literature that this distinction between directly and indirectly social labour. So a lot of the confusion I think on these topics come out of the realities of like what happened in historical socialism. So like the idea that the market, Marxist talks about indirectly social labour, so that in private property and capitalism, the individual producers, their labour that they do in their goods is only socially validated in the market after the fact. It's indirectly social, right? And this is positive. Marx says, like in socialism, everything will be directly social. So the labour is immediately social. Okay. Now, in the 40s, when in the Soviet Union they realised that like value is still operative, and we needed to like come up with some, you know, ideological reason why we could say that is true. They said, well, you know, well, okay, we may still have like some kind of market stuff going on, but because we say it in advance, right, it's directly social. And so instead of it being about the valorization of the production on independent producers and private property, it became about if we do it beforehand, it's okay, right? Versus the reactive nature of after being validated post hoc. But if we look, this is a real confusion. If we look to say hunter-gatherers, right? The problem is not whether they do it beforehand or whether it's spontaneous versus not spontaneous. Right? The hunter-gatherer who sees some animal and shoots it spontaneously, that labour is directly social. There's no market mechanism. It's not private property. It's not going through this thing. So this has been conflated, and it goes back to like 1944 or something when they started redefining a lot of the terms in the Soviet Union. Okay, so we've got to really think about directly social and indirectly social labour. Okay. Right, so here's something, that planning is epiphenomenal of communal relations of production. Right, so the planned socialist economy, like what we really need to get right are the base social relations of communist society. That, like in capitalism and value capital, Marx goes really deep into the social relations of production of capitalism. Right? He doesn't talk about what planning is in capitalism because he's trying to get into economic laws. Right? And I think what we need to kind of do is concentrate on understanding those economic laws, because the planning is epiphenomenal of what the social relations of production are. They will flow out of those. I think that's where we need to really, honestly, place our attention. And so there's this kind of thing I think is quite ubiquitous is that planning is kind of lauded as a kind of an economic category in the socialist discourse, right? Well, planning is not like an economic category. Like, it's not like wage labor, you know, exploitation, interest, rents, any of these economic categories. It's more like an activity like management or something, right? And so we shouldn't be positing like planning versus like capitalist political economy. We need to be trying to understand socialist political economy and planning as an activity within that. Okay, that's the general point. And so this is it again. So in the discourse we often have like this idea of like planning techniques. Is this the right planning technique for socialism or blah 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 blah? But really, what we need to get is the correct underlying social relations of socialist or communist political economy. And I think there is a great synthesis to be had to learn from political, from analysis of political economy, you know, understanding what Marx's analysis really was all about, and what he said about socialism, and what we can take from that, and also what we learn from cybernetics, what we know about the nature of organizations, the kind of scientific basis of it, of the structures of organizations, how systems have to be designed for them to be viable. The ideas of recursion, the ideas of being able to deal with variety, having requisite variety. And so these things are all tightly linked, and we see like very deep relations between, if we look at the best capitalist production techniques are heavily influenced by cybernetic theory, and we see a deep relation between alienation and cybernetics. We see like the kind of political analysis and the cybernetics giving us a kind of a synthesis which points towards what we can get to an understanding of socialism. And similarly, SDT, what Ferdy was talking yesterday about the nature of how people, you know, I kind of think of it as a kind of a science of alienation, right? And at base, what we're trying to think of and we're trying to come up with is a communism, a socialism, whereby we do not have alienated labour at its roots, because for Marx and Engels, that was the very essence of class society, and what we're really going for is a society of de-alienated labour. And I think there's a deep link between cybernetics, political economy, and some of the psychological evidence for that. Okay, that's the talk, I think. Thank you.